Tashdile, Namaskar. Good morning in Europe and good evening in India and late good evening in Australia. I'm Vijay Kranti, and today we are in this webinar, which is jointly organized by the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement and Tibetan Youth Congress. We are running this series on Tibet for now more than 1 year. And today we are going to discuss the subject challenges before His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And this is to commemorate his 87th birthday, which falls on 6th July this week, 3 days later. So we all wish His Holiness Dalai Lama a happy birthday, a very long life, and we wish that all his supporters and those who need his support, they enjoy a very long term with him as their leader. So today we will be talking about the subject challenges before His Holiness Dalai Lama. And before we go to the right subject, I will introduce the organizing groups and our speakers. In the meanwhile, may I request Sonamla to please send the link to Lagyari Namgyal Dolkar. There is some problem in her connection. You please send the link her again. Thank you. So as we all know that this series is being organized by the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, in short it is CHASE, and Tibetan Youth Congress, TYC. As you know, CHASE is a think tank which is focused on understanding issues which are impacting countries and societies in and around Himalayan Asia region. And it's a platform for exchange of knowledge, views, and perspectives among Indian and international experts, researchers, writers, and advocacy groups who take keen interest in various aspects of political, social, economic, and strategic developments in this region. And as you know, Tibetan Youth Congress is the largest and the oldest socio-political organization of Tibetan diaspora. And currently it is the third generation of Tibetan youths, the exiles who are born in exile in India and other countries, who are leading Tibetan Youth Congress. Tibetan Youth Congress has proven to be a very successful nursery of Tibetan leadership in exile. If you see the list of the members of parliament, the prime ministers, and the Sikyong, you will find almost everybody has graduated through Tibetan Youth Congress. So the members of Tibetan Youth Congress have been quite active in social and political activities. And so we have Mr. Sonam Tsering from Tibetan Youth Congress, who is the General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress, who will be with us today on behalf of Tibetan Youth Congress. Sonamla, welcome to this group.
Thank you, Vijay.
He has been one of the most senior leaders of the younger generation, the current generation of Tibetan Youth Congress and Tibetan society. So welcome, Sonamla. We have three speakers today. We have first Kai Mueller. He is the executive director of International Campaign for Tibet in Germany. Kai, welcome. And Kai is not new to most of our audience. He has been with us in these webinars earlier a few times on different aspects. And today he is with us. Mr. Kai Mueller, he, as I said, is executive director of the International Campaign for Tibet in Germany since 2005. And he coordinates ICT's UN-related advocacy and EU-related advocacy. And he has himself testified before the Parliament and UN human rights bodies. He's a jurist and social scientist by his personal training and specialization. He has been involved in social studies, political science, and public administration. As we know, ICT promotes the self determination and human rights of Tibetans, and it maintains offices in Washington, Brussels, Berlin, Amsterdam. And I hope everybody knows that IC has played very important role in promoting the cause of Tibet in North America, in Europe, and very effectively. We have our one more speaker who is joining us first time, and that is Nurgul Saud, who is an Uyghur leader, a very prominent spokesperson of the Uyghur community, the exile community, and the people living inside East Turkestan. Nurgul Saud is a very prominent leader who operates from Australia. Currently, she is the executive chairperson of Uyghur Freedom Forum. And in 2019 and 20, she was a member of board of director of Washington DC based campaign for Uyghurs. So by profession, she is a therapist, but at the same time, she is also a consultant, Uyghur community leader, and a frontline human rights activist of the Uyghur community. She has a long introduction, but in very short, I would tell you that she has been, besides being an outspoken spokesperson for against the Chinese atrocities on Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim communities in East Turkestan, and she has been participating in multiple campaign networks which have focused on ending Uyghur forced labor, ending forced organ harvest, and promotion of democracy. So she came for studies to Australia in 2000, and before that, she did her post graduation in China, in Chinese universities in business management. And then later on, she had a chance to come to Australia, and since then, she is working for the cause of the entire Uyghur nation. So, welcome, Nurgul. You are joining us first time. So, welcome to this webinar series.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
welcome. So, we have our third speaker, a very prominent Tibetan leader. She is Namgyal Dolkar Lagyari. She is a member of parliament, the Tibetan parliament, and one of the best known faces of current generation who have been presenting the cause of Tibet on various international forums. So Lagyari, she has been earlier associated with Guchusum, which is the Association of Former Prisoners of Conscience in occupied Tibet. And she has been spearheading the legal empowerment projects under Tibetan Women Association, which is the one of the major organizations of the exile community of Tibet. And she did her MA in English literature, and she has been active on socio-political front for a very long time. So welcome, Namgyal Dolkarji, to this group. So today we are, as I said, are going to commemorate the 87th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And as I said, his 87th birthday falls on next week on 6th July. So as we wish His Holiness a long life and wish him a very happy birthday, so we are going to today discuss what are the challenges that His Holiness Dalai Lama is facing today, because as the leader, supreme leader of Tibetan people, the supreme spiritual leader, as well as the if I say political leader or the head of state of Tibet by tradition, His Holiness the Dalai Lama as you all know, he took up the responsibility of his nation at a much younger age than he was expected when China attacked Tibet and tried to occupy Tibet in 1949. So, immediately after that, in 1950, when His Holiness was just 15 years old, and he had not yet attained his adulthood when he was supposed to take over the political responsibilities of Tibet. At that time, he was forced to prepone his responsibilities, and at the age of 15, he took over the mantle of head of state to handle the Chinese aggression. That was in 1950. In 1951, as we know, China occupied Tibet and gave so many promises to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to the people of Tibet, to the world, that they will behave very nicely to Tibetans. But unfortunately, all those promises went on falling apart. And by the time 1959, the people of Tibet were so fed up and unhappy with Chinese that there was an uprising, and the Chinese crushed that uprising with a very heavy hand. If we go to by United Nations records, more than 80,000 people, Tibetans, were killed, massacred by the Chinese army in the first fortnight of this uprising. And as they tried to arrest or even to kill His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the only choice he was left with to leave Tibet. And he walked through one of the most difficult terrains of the world through Himalayas for 17 days to cross Tibet and reach India. Since then, he is living in exile and leading his people. And during this period, he has introduced remarkable changes and he has made remarkable achievements for Tibetan people. He converted a political system which was very theocratic and feudal in nature by tradition, and converted into a democracy. And it is a very thriving democracy today. I don't want to go into so many details, but today, the Tibetan people who are living in almost 70 countries across the world, they elect through secret ballot, like any other government, whether we do in India or in America or in most European countries. Tibetans also elect their leaders through their parliamentarians, their prime minister, and now the Sikyong, who is equivalent of prime minister plus president rolled into one. So they elect all of them through secret ballot from all these countries, and their government in exile, which is also called Central Tibetan Administration, operates from Dharamsala. So during this period, a couple of achievements of Dalai Lama we must know before we get into the real discussion. His Holiness Dalai Lama has used this opportunity, and on the basis of very limited human talent, he has revived the Tibetan national identity over last 70 years. And today the result is India has become the largest reservoir of Tibetan national identity, the Tibetan culture, religion, and this includes Chinese occupied Tibet. So that is one of the biggest achievements of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Now we come to our speakers who will be dealing with different aspects of what challenges His Holiness Dalai Lama is facing today and how he is handling these challenges. What are the hopes? What are the pitfalls we will be discussing today? So, may I request Kai Mueller, uh, our one of most, I would say, experienced speakers, because he has made presentations in front of many parliaments and many esteemed groups about Tibet. So, may I request Kai Mueller to please make your presentation? Kai Mueller.
Thank you very much, Vijay Kranti from Chase and the Tibetan Youth Congress for this invitation to speak here today about Tibet. Indeed, ahead of the birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama next week. Before I would like to begin with my presentation, I would like to note sad news of the passing of yet another courageous Tibetan by the name of Jigme Guri, who in 2008 became known when he spoke to Voice of America openly about the torture he experienced in Chinese detention. It was an extremely bold act and tragically followed by a multitude of detention and torture afterwards. While seriously ill, he was released in 2016. We hear today that he passed away yesterday, apparently from health issues that date back to his prison time. He was only 56 years old. May he rest in peace, like the many other courageous Tibetans who passed away. I've been asked to speak about challenges, or better, the threat to Tibetan identity. While I believe that my Tibetan colleagues have a more informed view on this issue, I still would like to make some general observations with regard to Chinese policies affecting Tibetan culture and identity, which then present a challenge to the Tibetans all over the world, in exile, in Tibet, and as we are speaking today about it for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Let me first state that the onslaught of the CCP onto the Tibetan culture is systematic, gradual, and tremendously consequential for the Tibetan culture. This onslaught focuses on three areas: on education and language, on religion, and on general, what we may call in general, ways of living. First of all, education and language. Research shows that Tibetan as a language of instruction in Tibetan schools has been widely marginalized, in some areas already fully replaced by Chinese. Moreover, Tibetan children already at a very early age are sent to boarding schools across Tibet, where they are alienated from their mother tongue and culture through curricula that are distinctly Chinese. Parents effectively have no choice but to consent to send their children there. And we are talking about 800 to 900,000 Tibetan children. So a dramatically high number of affected individuals. At the same time, Tibetan independent thought leaders or intellectuals and writers are being persecuted because of their peaceful expression of opinion, which in many cases is not even political as such. For example, the Tibetan monk Gosherab Gyatso has been detained 2 years ago and later sentenced to 10 years in prison. Gyatso was known for his independent thought and critical look at Tibetan culture itself. UN human rights experts have raised his case with the Chinese government in the follow-up. Last week, the International Campaign for Tibet reported on the detentions of another 6 Tibetans, just recently, among them writers and intellectuals. For example, Thupten Lodoi, 34 years old, writing under the pseudonym Sabuche, was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison around June 14, 22. He was taken into custody in mid-October 21 and held in incommunicado detention for 8 months prior to a court sentencing him to 4.5 years in prison on charges of inciting separatism, so-called endangering state security, and what they term harming ethnic unity. Details about where he is imprisoned at the time are still unknown. We need to know, Thupten had been warned several times in the past by Chinese security officers about his prolific writings on socio-economic issues. His writings in both Tibetan and Chinese have appeared on various social media and literature forums and are loved apparently by readers in Tibet. He also translated many Chinese and English works into Tibetan. Following his arrest in October 21, security officials seized his computer and used the content therein as proof of his so-called separatist activity, according to the India-based Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, TCHRD. His social media accounts have been blocked and the posts erased. We are told that many more intellectuals like him and writers have been sent to prison in Tibet. We just don't hear about these cases because of the information lockdown in Tibet. A Tibetan colleague of mine described this as the Tibetan culture being squashed from the top and from the bottom, and actually this being more effective than policies from the Cultural Revolution. And this strategy is reminiscent, particularly for Europeans, of Stalinist tactics when it was intended to eradicate Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian culture by banning languages and eliminating the cultural elite. In the case of Tibet, it is striking to see that any thought leader is coming under threat of persecution because there shall be no cultural leadership, no orientation or guidance or discourse, independent discourse among Tibetan society. As a result, Tibetan society is without direction other than what is prescribed, and one must say what is vulgar Communist Party ideology, dressed up as Xi Jinping court and the like. The second area of concern is the one of religion. It is well known by now that the Communist Party claims authority over the appointment of the next Dalai Lama. But let us not forget about the fact that the CCP, codified in 2007 already, has been on top of the appointment of what they call living Buddhas in Tibet altogether. No Tibetan Buddhist can become a spiritual leader without consent of the Chinese state. This strikes at the heart of Tibetan Buddhist religion. It is protected standard of international law to determine and appoint one's clergy without state interference. I shall note that for decades now, since the abduction of the Panchen Lama in 1995, UN experts and expert bodies have stressed this right of the Tibetan people. And last time this happened was in 2020. But what about life in monasteries and nunneries under full surveillance and control of the party? What about the rights of lay Tibetans to freely practice their religion and to revere the Dalai Lama? What about the missing child, the Panchen Lama Gedun Chökyi Nyima? What about the interference into religious curricula? What about the closure of monastery schools? I want to leave this point here, as my time is not enough to go into these points at this very occasion. Let us bear in mind that Tibetan Buddhism is one core tenet of Tibetan identity. Anything that affects it also deeply affects Tibetan identity. Lastly, and the third point, let us look at the ongoing relocations of Tibetans. Just last week, we heard about the relocation of some 17,000 Tibetans away from their homes to a some 400-kilometer distant area in the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. The Chinese authorities have been using different notions for such relocation programs, I should better say as a pretext to exert population control. Sometimes relocations are to serve, as they say, the protection of the environment, sometimes for the sake of poverty alleviation, sometimes simply because Tibetans should not live in high altitudes. So the marketing changes, but the pattern has remained the same. So far, in the past decades, according to data from the Chinese state media, up to 2 million Tibetans have been relocated, most of them herders and nomads, others ordinary townspeople, like in our recent example, which I cited just now. Given there is no means of redress, no means of challenging the authorities through an independent judiciary, Tibetans have to accept such measure. There is no other way, because there is no independent judiciary, only CCP courts. It does not take much to imagine what this means for the affected Tibetans. Impoverishment, marginalization, an uprooting of culture, and upending of ways of lives with dramatic effects. All these people are now, more or less, one must fear, cheap labor for a hardcore capitalist economy. I would like to counter still the assumption here that Tibetans are mere victims or objects of repressive policies. Quite the opposite. They want to be masters of their own fates. They become activists for the protection of their language, of their religion, and of their environment, and hence their country and culture. Recently, the International Campaign for Tibet has released a report titled Environmental Defenders of Tibet. This report collates and analyzes information on 50 cases of known Tibetan environmental defenders who have been reportedly persecuted since 2008. It highlights the significance of the Tibetan Plateau to the Asian region and the global climate system, the major threats facing Tibet's environment, and, as said, the persecution of environmental defenders. I would like to give one example. The death in custody of Kunchuk Jimpa, a tour guide by profession and an environmental defender by passion, on 6 February 21, outraged the international community. At the time of his death, the 51-year-old Jimpa had served 8 years of his 21-year prison sentence for sharing information with foreign media about environmental and political protests in Jiri County, Nakshu Prefecture in the so-called TAR. Moments before his arrest, Jinpa posted a message on his WeChat account reaffirming his commitment to reporting on local issues. I quote, "I am now at the bank of a river. There are many people behind me watching me, and I'm sure to be arrested. Even if they arrest me, I'm not afraid. Even if they kill me, I have no regrets. But from now on, I will not be able to give reports. If there's no word from me, that means I've been arrested." Jinpa's case is one among many cases of persecuted Tibetan environmental defenders. As China has escalated its development projects across Tibet in the last 20 years, since the launch of the so-called Great Western Development Policy in 2000, hundreds of Tibetan defenders have been arrested for resisting mining, infrastructure, and urbanization projects. These Tibetans are standing up against harmful policies of the CCP. They are courageous, principled, and determined. They need our support. I want to close by refuting the narratives that we are presented here all too often in the West in particular. Tibetans are backward, that they should use the programs offered by the Chinese state, and that some Tibetans are okay with their new lives. But this omits one core point, that Tibetans are bearers of the same rights as anyone else. And let us do the test here in the West. Would any one of us remotely accept that the dictatorial regime would want to decide for us what we speak, what we believe in, and how and where we live? I think our answer is quite clear. And this goes anywhere in the world. So why should we accept these policies in Tibet? In closing, I would like to urge the international community to understand the CCP policies in Tibet as what they are, a systematic and intentional attempt to eradicate the culture. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kai Mueller. You have been very specifically focused on the challenges which the people of Tibet and His Holiness Dalai Lama are facing in the form of danger to the Tibetan cultural identity, social identity, and their environmental integrity. Thank you very much. This is surely one of the most serious challenges which the Tibetan people have to handle, which His Holiness Dalai Lama is facing throughout his more than 6 decades of exile. And let us hope the Dalai Lama and people of Tibet can face these challenges and Tibet comes out victorious in spite of whatever power China holds today. So thank you very much, Kai Mueller, for giving a wonderful perspective on this aspect. So now we have our friend from Canberra. We have Nurgul Sawut, who is, as I introduced her, that she's a prominent Uyghur leader, and she's the chairperson of Uyghur Freedom Forum. She operates from Canberra, and she has her perspective as an Uyghur fighter about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because we have seen that over the past many decades, not only Tibetan people, but those who are fighting Chinese colonialism very strongly, whether they are people of East Turkestan, which China calls Xinjiang, or they are people of South Mongolia, which China calls Inner Mongolia, or the people of Hong Kong, and even people who are fighting for establishing democracy inside Tibet. One thing very interesting which has emerged over the last 6 decades is they all look towards His Holiness the Dalai Lama as their own leader. And the popularity of Dalai Lama across the continents and his influence over the thinking minds of the world. And more than that, when we see that here is China, which is emerging as one of the not powerful, but the most rogue power of the world. They have the cheek to shout at the American presidents, the European Union, and the governments of Taiwan or governments of Japan or Australia. They have the cheek to shout at them. But the moment it comes to the name of Dalai Lama, their tone changes. They look irritated. They lose their balance. They lose their whatever culture, Chinese culture gave them about decency. They suddenly lose it. And that shows the strength of Dalai Lama. So we have Nurgul Sawut with us, a very prominent Uyghur leader who will present her perspective on, of course, the problems Uyghurs are facing and how they look at Dalai Lama. Uyghur Sawut, please.
And sorry, okay, I'm muted. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And there's a couple of things I really want to point out. One is I think it's perfectly the way to describe the Tibetan Youth Congress is almost like this like a nurturing nest for modern day Tibetan the leaders and the young leaders. And so I'm very honored and very pleased. Actually, I've been invited by Tibetan Youth Congress and attending today's this webinar. And so for me, this is my honor. And then I would like to quickly move into the main point. I really want to draw some attention between our struggle and versus Tibetan people's struggle. And I have done this one before, and I'm going to repeat again. So my prescription from 2018, it's never changed. And actually more and more what we're experiencing now is actually just cementing what I said back in 2018. In terms of there's so much grounding and a similarity in terms of the Chinese regime, the persecution style inside of Tibet, and as well as inside East Turkestan. If you look at the Tibet, and at the time, and the Tibet's population, it's far less than East Turkestan, and at the same time, the population, there's a density is lower. And we did our own comparative analysis. And if what we look at, what we're experiencing now, over 1,000 camps in East Turkestan, it's actually already had happened inside of Tibet. And that's way back 1990, mid-1990s. No one cared about it. And the people actually removed from their villages and from their homes and from the monasteries. And they created those camps. And because the camp size is not that big, and the people, when they're locked up, and they are almost turning into invisible because it's not mass numbers. So, and then the Chinese government actually managed to cover up and get away with it. And if you look at a state-run boarding school, what's happening to us now? If we look at we are almost a 750,000 children actually completely pulled away from the families. While adults, have been taken into the camp, those children actually forced into the boarding schools, the state-run boarding schools. And those are state-run boarding schools. What happens now is automatically turning into those cultural, like a brainwashing center. So in that sense, it's very similar, or it's almost like I would dare to say, because of the same dictator, the execute both whole exercise in Tibet and as well as in our homeland, it's very similar. And the pattern actually expanded right into East Turkestan, and size is a double to triple, even 10 times larger. And when size become way too big and they can't cover up anymore, now international start paying attention, go backward, start learning about what Chungcheongo actually did back in 1990s inside the Tibet. And the other learnings we also took away from there is that back then, Tibet, a lot of Tibetan activists actually clearly like brave enough to speak up. This is cultural genocide. The amount of stuff they're doing, uprooting our cultural monuments, the eliminating certain practice, both in city centers as well as even right up to the small villages. And so that's including banning the language. And I think about it, all this boarding school, both inside the Tibet and the children taken out of Tibet, sent to inner China, they don't learn Tibetan language. So does our children. Our children exactly gone through the same pattern. When they're going into state-run this orphanage, forget about any Uyghur language. Now they're completely gone. And they also transformed culturally, and describing Uyghur culture is something like an evil sense, something like a disgraceful, and putting down their own culture and replacing with the even ancient Chinese, the Confucius-based culture, which is something like a Chinese. Han Chinese, they don't even practice in their day-to-day life. So that's how bad it is. And so Tibetan children was banned from learning their language. They pretty much, by the time they finish year 12, I have seen those children when I was working inside China, in Beijing especially. They can't speak Tibetan language. And they completely forgot about their own mother tongue. They can't communicate even between them to start talking in Mandarin. Now, our children turning into exactly the same, or going through the same process. And this is the one of the things. Then, Kai, you mentioned about the religious persecution, and how a religious landscape as well as monuments are destroyed. Have a look at our situation. And we did that documentation 2 years ago. And it's recorded we meant to have different sizes, shape, almost 24,000 mosques and prayer places. By the end of 2000, very much in less than 18 months, they demolished 16,000 of them. They kept some for turning into bar, entertaining places, and they kept some others. So for tourists, for tourism. And they only open up when there's more pressure from the international community for inviting people, even paying the community members to going in, setting up the stage, try to acting like they're allowed to pray in the mosque. And we have actually gathered so much evidence and the data on that one too. And what happens, the greatest, the loss of all, is we have it's 500 years old mosque, and back in the Kaghalak, which is south side of East Turkestan. They demolished them. And when international pressure increased so excessively, and we really did campaign, guess what happened? They minimized such a ginormous, this historical building, made it exactly the same style, but 1/10 of the size. And they also expanded this photo, did a little bit Photoshop, and showing international community, oh, we didn't demolish that. See, this building exactly in the same spot and same place still exists. That's how the stage run, this like a theater we're seeing day after day, trying to brush off international communities. And I think a Tibetan community in that sense is a way to advance than our way of handling the situation, more experience. So for me, when I speak to some local Tibetan activists here in Australia, and we're just having this a little bit debriefing and an exchange of views, there's a lot of things actually I pick and I learn from them. Some of the information what you're sharing with me is really triggers the way I see why this thing's going. So we can actually step ahead, we can plan better and run our campaign far more effectively. And so for me, in that sense, we are almost like a comrades, and we up against the same evil regime. We up against exactly the same pattern of systemic genocide. There's nothing less. And this is my like a little it's an outline between a comparison between what Tibetan people going through and what our community in East Turkestan going through right now. Now, my second part of talk is the role of His Holiness Dalai Lama and his influence in a fight against such evil power. And for me, like if you really look clearly, His Holiness Dalai Lama is like a promoter of Buddhist philosophy and the Buddhist ideology, right? He's the religious leader. And whereas us, and we Muslim population, and we should not have any connection in between, but it's not. We do. What we actually learn from His Holiness and his way he's actually leads, influence the international community, and how international community sees the Chinese regimes in the aggressive, brutal behavior in their colonial lands. That's beyond word and beyond any description. And time to time, His Holiness actually steps in, put things straight when it's a little bit get out of the line. And if you remember back in 2009, and we did have there's huge outbreak back in Urumqi. Like literally, the military was pulled in to repress innocent people and who's actually protesting on the street and doesn't have a piece of metal or even a piece of wood on their hands. All the mail is taken away, and all half of the city was shut down. Turn off the light. All they did the whole night, the door to door, pulling people out, arresting and shooting. That's all they did. In that period, and His Holiness actually met our leader back then, Rabbi Kadir. This is the first time they're actually meeting, and he really did, not using one word, but the action, showed his humanitarian support to our cause. And at this time around, have a look what happened. And when our, the numbers of camps, the numbers of people locked up in the camp, when it going into really high, then back in 2019, once again, His Holiness actually come up and meet some of their community members, even like where we were at, and showing, I'm thinking about you. And I am with you. This is his way of expressing his support. And so those kind of like a little gesture, the action from His Holiness, it's for us, it means a lot. And so because of that, and our community, both Tibetan and Uyghur community, we actually slowly merge and we learned how to work together. We understand, get to know each other and understand each other slightly in depth. And when we run certain campaigns, those certain things, we can actually quite happily come in, integrate quite naturally, organically. We can do things together. And we also have this like a great learning, a journey, what we did set up for ourselves. It's like we learn from Tibetan exile government. And because we did understand since 2016 until now is like how important to have your own, like it doesn't matter, it's exile government, it's like this administrative system that actually it's just such important the core, like a power. You can hold the community together. You can actually maneuver everyone to the right direction. And we learn from that system. We speak to some of the parliament members. And so that's once again, and let international community know, hang on, hello, Tibetan can run the system in a democratic way. They can elect their members in a democratic way. So does the Uyghur people. We can run, if one day we will have such effective exile government, we can do exactly the same thing, because Tibetan already laid out those pathway for us. And once again, that whole discredit actually it's fall under His Holiness Dalai Lama and his many, many years of hard working and campaigning and encouraging his own community, and also managed to separate the politics from religion and where he stands and where he sits on that, separation process. For me, there's so much we can learn from His Holiness, and I personally I do. It's like his own personal influence on me, my way of thinking. Sometimes when I'm like almost down to the crashing point, I always go back and read some of his books and some of his scripts. Actually, it's so much meaningful, and it's give you so much enlightenment. And for me, and that's such a universal knowledge. And by the way, that universal knowledge doesn't matter what religion you are and who you are, as long as you want to stand the right side of the history, right side of the justice, you will understand what he's trying to tell the world. So for me, that's like a really natural, organic way of learning his message. And he's as long as His Holiness, I wish him long life. As long as he's alive, his influence never gonna die, and he's gonna keep strong, and also he will be such cornerstone for a whole Tibetan community and all the democratic fighters, and up against the same Chinese regime, for Taiwanese, for Hong Kongers, even South Mongolians, and we all in the same boat in this manner. And so there's one person actually managed to bring all of them in the same boat, who? His Holiness Dalai Lama. So I do pay my respect. And I want to end my this whole description on one very simple phrase: is all too often but very little known. So that's what's happening right now. International community, time to time, you do turn deaf ears and blind eyes to the how China behaves and what China actually does inside of their own colonial land, and as well as to on their own people. And I wish from now on, and yes, there's a certain level of awakening there, but I wish international community get to know real nature of CCP and the current Chinese regime in a much better, in the next level. So I will hand over the floor to Vijay, and please take over. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Nurgul, the way you have explained. Not only you explained the case of Uyghurs, how they are fighting, but it's a very new experience for many of us when we
Mhm.
learn how you connect the fight of Tibetans and fight of the Uyghurs against their colonial masters, the Chinese.
Yep.
The similarities in your struggle, the similarity in your suffering, and the way you have explained how His Holiness Dalai Lama has emerged as a model leader among all these fighting communities, struggling communities.
Mhm.
And I'm sure when you wished that your society one day will be in a position to have its own government in exile, like the Tibetans, so well knit, so well organized. I wish you success in that. And I had the
Thank
privilege
you.
I had the privilege of meeting your leader, Rabia Kadir, in some
Yes, I
very
do.
quite good sessions, and
Mhm.
that was quite encouraging and inspiring. So
Yes.
I'm happy that you have a leader like Rabia Kadir, and she has the capabilities of uniting your society into a community who can give a very good, very successful fight to the colonial occupiers of your country. I wish you success. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
yeah,
so much.
yeah. And now we are going to another speaker who is one of the most outstanding spokespersons of Tibetan refugee community. She is a young girl, if I can use the term, a young lady who is a parliamentarian, who has been a member of Guchusum, a very prominent organization of former political prisoners, the Tibetan prisoners in Chinese jails. So she had her training there, and of course, Tibetan Women Association also. And we have seen her presenting the case of Tibet in most prominent forums across the world. So we have Lagari Namgyal Dolkar with us, who will present the Tibetan perspective and how the Tibetans look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, especially on this occasion when we are celebrating the 87th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we have Namgyal Dolkar with us. Please.
Thank you, Vijaykanti-ji. Tasle and greetings to my co-panelists and the viewers of this webinar organized in commemoration of the 87th birthday of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So it's an advanced birthday celebration for us, so why not? So a very happy birthday to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. I want to thank Tibetan Youth Congress and Chase for inviting me again to share my thoughts and my views. I'm today participating as a Tibetan and a democratically elected representative as well. So my co-panelists have highlighted upon the detailed forms of human rights abuses Tibetans in Tibet are facing on daily basis, as well as perspective of an Uyghur ally, drawing parallels between the gross human rights violation taking place in occupied Tibet and occupied East Turkestan under PRC, as well as the solidarity of our movements through His Holiness. I would like to focus on the centrality, the achievements and challenges before His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. As we all know and we have heard on multiple platforms, His Holiness identifies himself firstly and foremostly always as a mere human being. And he advocates the cultivation of human values like compassion and forgiveness, self-discipline, contentment, and most importantly, warm-heartedness. And he says that as human beings, we're all same. We want to be happy, and nobody wants suffering. So that has been a core teaching of His Holiness for everyone, which is very universal in nature. And he's always referred to himself secondly as a Buddhist monk, who's committed to encouraging harmony between various religions, religious traditions, and how he recognizes the potential that each religion can create in, forming good human beings around the world. So this is how he refers to him secondly. But thirdly, and that is something which has remained always intriguing for me, how His Holiness at last and finally in the end recognizes himself as a Tibetan and as the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet, who is the beacon of the Tibetan peoples, our hope and our trust. So in the end, after his responsibility towards the 7 billion human beings and various religious traditions, he is committed into the Tibetan movement about preserving our language, our culture, and our heritage, that we have received from India, the Nalanda University, and how, apart from our religion, our language, our identity, he has been one of the foremost international leader who has spoken about critical climate crisis and importance of Tibet's natural environment and its protection on that regard. So he has always shared his honest opinion to the world in offering his teachings and services as a Tibetan Buddhist, and how his upbringing has guided him into making this this universe a better place. He has inspired millions, like my friend, our co-panelists, to pursue, warm-heartedness, to pursue happiness, and to consciously choose non-violence and dialogue over war. And moreover, he was among the first global leader, as I've already mentioned, who addressed climate crisis. In the 80s, it was not a topic that people discussed. People used to shun the topic, but His Holiness was one of the foremost leaders who have done that. And after the invasion of Chinese invasion of Tibet, just at the fragile age of 15, His Holiness was called upon to take a full political power in Tibet, and then we know that, in 59, Tibet saw a brutal suppression, leading to His Holiness and more than 80,000 Tibetans coming in exile. And he was just 24 years of age at the moment. But it's amazing for me, as a Tibetan born in exile, to parents who were former political prisoners, of how His Holiness was able to turn this unfortunate circumstances for Tibet and for himself into an opportunity and a blessing in disguise, not just for himself, but for the Tibetans and his followers across the world. So I think that is something that we all learn on daily basis from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. And I think it's important that before we discuss the challenges before His Holiness, we might as well discuss the achievements that he has attained over the years, over the decades. And to be honest, I really don't need to glorify his achievements. For today he has His Holiness has received over 150 prizes, honorary doctorates, and awards. We know about the Nobel Peace Prize. We know about the Congressional Gold Medal. We know about the Templeton Prizes, and so many important honorary doctorates, which were offered to him in recognizing his message of peace, of non-violence, of interreligious harmony, of universal responsibility and compassion. So His Holiness has been recognized by the entire international community. So, over the decades, His Holiness, I have looked up to him, not just as a Tibetan, but as a democratically elected leader who has, over the years held and still holds himself to such high standard. And in doing so, he has inspired so many of us common people to do the same. His Holiness has the farsightedness and the courage to commit himself and bring the Tibetans on board on two very historically important case of nation building, if I may highlight upon that. Firstly, to build a democratic conscious society among the Tibetans who have been heavily dependent politically and emotionally on him and his appointed leadership. And secondly, moreover, to pursue the freedom movement of Tibet while initiating a democratic political structure, a modern education, representation, non-violent struggle as a cornerstone. So, it is clear that a freedom struggle is beyond political issue, rather on fulfilling a social, economic aspirations of the Tibetans and the existence of our identity as Tibetans, with our own unique culture, language, and religion, and many identity. I would say that His Holiness's vision is not just to replace the foreign imperialist Chinese with some set of few chosen Tibetan elites, but democratically elected leadership who are nurtured with optimism and faith in the power of peace, the power of democracy, integrity, and the sovereign of Tibet. So I think the notion of democracy by His Holiness, honestly, for me, is not just limited to political and civil rights like our right to votes and governance, but beyond that. For me, it's about Tibetans taking responsibility for our own cause, taking charge for our own cause, and becoming our own leader, literally taking our trainings for him while he is there to guide us, today. And this is the notion of democracy by His Holiness for me. And I would say that another very significant contribution of His Holiness remains the perhaps the reconstruction and reframing of Tibetan Buddhism for the entire world population, but particularly, most importantly, for the future generation of Tibetans and Buddhists around the world. Because Buddhism is something for lay people like us uh, looked upon as such pious, so important that sometimes we feel it's so far away. But the way His Holiness has been able to deconstruct that for us, to let us know that it's achievable. You can be kind, you can be conscious, and Buddhism is for everyone. And it's an education that we can attain while we pursue our movement. Without a doubt, it's important to mention how His Holiness remains the most powerful unofficial ambassador for India and its traditional wisdom, reflection of unity and diversity in terms of various forms like religion, customs, and castes of India. I believe that wherever His Holiness travels around the world, he has mentioned how grateful he is to government of India and the people of India, and the love and affection that he has received from India. And I've always said that His Holiness will remain the most powerful unofficial ambassador for India, and he has been doing such a remarkable responsibility at that. Now, if I can go to the topic discussing the challenge before His Holiness, I believe that the greatest challenge that we have, that His Holiness has, is time. That is actually speeding up. His Holiness's identity that I've already mentioned of recognizing himself firstly as human beings, as a human being, then a Buddhist practitioner, and then the Dalai Lama. That identity actually remains the cause of challenge before the leadership of People's Republic of China. Despite His Holiness's complete political retirement and his sole identity as a spiritual leader of Tibet, uh, People's Republic of China and its leadership has never stopped to insult His Holiness publicly. By name calling him, we know that he's been called wolf in monk's robe and splitters and whatnot. We know that His Holiness has clarified that it does not affect him in any manner. But we have seen the potential and the poor behavior of PRC. It's interesting how while we are talking about His Holiness and the challenges that he's faced, and a topic that Kai Muller has already discussed is about how, despite CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, being the atheist state, we know about their order number 5 that they issued in 2007 that dictates that the Buddhist temples must file a reincarnation application and obtain approval from several government agencies before the reincarnation is presented. And His Holiness has clarified that apart from reincarnation recognized through legitimate methods, no recognition or acceptance should be given to candidate chosen for political ends by anyone, including PRC. So I think this is one of the most difficult position front there is when it comes to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama at the moment. And furthermore, I would say that the cause of Tibet, considering His Holiness's endorsement of middle way approach of seeking genuine autonomy under the constitution of PRC, is we know that it's heavily dependent upon the game plan and policy of PRC leadership. We know that PRC till date hasn't acknowledged that Tibet cause exists, and that they've mentioned that there is only Dalai Lama issue. But more importantly, what PRC wants from us is to change the course of history by reiterating PRC's propaganda that Tibet has been an inalienable part of China. That is absolutely preposterous, but with the chasing time, we know that it also means that His Holiness is not getting any younger. PRC is under the illusion that once we reach a moment of post-Dalai Lama, it means no future for Tibetans. Hence, the tranquility and total control as they wish for. However, they must know, PRC leadership must know that Tibet in the past has witnessed periods of leadership transition and vacuums. And even though it might have been difficult periods, Tibetan leadership overcame stronger than ever before. And this period of Tibet could be seen as one of the most difficult circumstances, but also a period which has witnessed many leaderships from the masses at different front, with the gift of democracy by His Holiness. Even the Tibetans inside Tibet, without a strong leadership under the occupied territory, has been able to challenge the dictatorial imperialist Chinese government for the past more than 60 years under a different generation. It is the teaching of His Holiness in their heart, the pride as Tibetans, and their courage to resist for justice that has retained their grit. And I believe that this will remain a case during post Dalai Lama as well. It will be emotionally, spiritually challenging for us, but we as Tibetans shall resist with his teachings in our heart. Under the leadership of His Holiness, we have overcome lots of obstacles for Tibet, and we know that there will be additional challenges ahead of us. But I've already mentioned that the legacy of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama shall be the bestowal of democracy to the people of Tibet, which in turn means many capable leadership addressing the cause of Tibet in relation to China with endless variations. His Holiness has empowered us with tools of democracy, of service, perseverance, commitment over the years. And today the leadership exists in each one of us, not just the Tibetans around the free world, but also Tibetans in Tibet. His Holiness has taught us to look at ourselves, find our purpose, leave our mark, and consult our own inner compass for the greater cause of Tibet and the world. So, all I want to say is, may His Holiness live with us for many decades as he has promised. Even recently, during one of the long life offering ceremony, he has promised that he will live for more decades with us, to guide us and to inspire us as we face PRC. So I would like to wrap up my case here. I want to thank Tibetan Youth Congress and Chase for your inspiring effort in bringing the spotlight of truth of Tibet and our allies, and carrying the words of His Holiness the Dalai Lama with you on each step that you all take. And I want to say that we are on a difficult route of challenging a dictatorial colonizer. It's a very difficult route, and a colonizer with its devious plot of aggression. But we also know that no battle is easy. But with our perseverance, with our dedication, we shall win this together. So I want to say, let's never give up. Let's continue to work together, as Tibetans, as allies, as Tibet supporters, as supporters of truth around the world, and keep the teachings and words of His Holiness with us. I want to take the opportunity again to wish His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama a very happy 87th birthday. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Namdullah. You have been inspiring, especially for those people, those who are non-Tibetans, who are not aware of the Tibetan sentiments. The way you explained that how His Holiness the Dalai Lama has empowered people, so many generations of Tibetans over last 60 years, that they, without even lack of leadership, you gave example of Tibetan people living inside Tibet, who have no leadership, who have no organization, who have no communication with each other. And still we find that they are giving a tough fight to their colonial masters. And I personally, my opinion about Tibetans living inside, having seen them from a very close distance through my many visits to Tibet, and having met many people from many areas of Tibet, I am of the opinion that all friends of Tibet should feel rest assured about the people living inside Tibet, their grit, their power to resist the colonial masters is remarkable and is continuing. But thank you very much for reassuring all of us on this special day. So thank you, Lagyari. And now it's time to pick up a few questions. Today, my colleague, Professor Ayushi Ketkar, would have done that, but she is not with us because she has gone through a surgery yesterday and she's recovering from it. We all wish her early recovery. And I'm sure next time when we meet, we will have Professor Ayushi Ketkar with us to handle this question answer session. So in her absence, I will handle a few questions which we have got in our comments section from across the world. I have, if I can see a few questions. There is one, Mr. Tsering Sonam, who has a couple of questions. The one question is that how the international community can punish China. That's very interesting. So I'll come to his second question later. This is one, how the international community, here he is putting responsibility on the international community to face China or to bring sense in the heads of Chinese leaders. So may I request Kai Mueller, and then I will ask our two other speakers. How do you look at this question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's thank you. I mean, it's a very pertinent question, of course, and I wouldn't so much term it as punishment, but as being consequential in international law. Whenever there is such a gross violation of human rights, I think there needs to be more done than just words. I mean, words and declarations and statements by governments on what is going on in Tibet and with regard to the Uyghurs is utterly important. I don't want to diminish that. But things have changed a little, and they've changed to the worse. I mean, they have already been not good, pretty bad actually, even before Xi Jinping came to power. A lot of people forget that situation in Tibet wasn't good at all. And also the situation, if I may say that, in East Turkestan has been quite dramatically bad, even before 2018, when it became somewhat known to the international public what's actually going on in East Turkestan. So that being said, we as International Campaign for Tibet, we are asking governments to be consequential. That means that on a concrete level, that, for example, the European Union should consider and actually pass sanctions, personal sanctions against officials in the party and state apparatus in Tibet who are responsible for the policies which I've described in my presentation earlier. So in analogy to what has been done with regard to East Turkestan in 2021 by the European Union, for example, this could be done, personalized sanctions against such individuals. And of course, I think on a more general level, Western countries or the international community should somewhere draw the line, but this does not regard the People's Republic alone. Many countries would come to my mind, but we should come back to the point or to the principle that we should not do business with torturers. We should not do business with people who kill their own citizens, if you will, citizens. I think that would be, I mean, not only for the betterment of the people affected in those countries under the CCP regime, but also for our societies. I mean, we need to look for partners and values and not so much in money making. And maybe both can be achieved. That would be certainly something. But I think it would be better to focus on partners in values. And I think the Tibetans are are those partners in values, particularly in the exile government and the exile communities. And I think that would be one way of countering autocracy, right? That we partner up with those who share democratic values and such humane principles.
Oh, thank you. Now, Nurgul, would you like to respond? Somebody has asked how to punish China.
And I have my personal view, and if I look at my own family and what we went through, and so many tragic stories I'm hearing in daily basis, I would think China should be punished. But the punishment is too easy for them. And I would actually encourage everyone to think more constructive way. These things has been going for years and years. And have a look what Tibet went through back in the 90s. Now we're talking about 2022. So we're looking at nearly 40 years of history here. Systemically, they pretty much learned all the evilness around the world. And I have seen many discussion around what's looked like, internment camp, what's looked like in camps in Europe, and camps in gulags, and camps in second end of the Second World War, in the UK, in the US allies established, and so on. This debate goes on and on and on. One thing they don't notice, actually, yes, the when the weapon is given to nice people, it's used for protecting others, right? When the weapon landed on a bad people's hand, what will happen? They're going to hurt others. They can use that weapon for any other purpose. So what China actually doing now, they pick up all the possible weapons around the world. They're using to kill, and as well as like mass internment of, they're second class citizens, by the way. And we don't call ourselves as a citizen. We are second class citizen inside of China. They decide to ask to be second class citizen since 2014, when they introduced their second generation ethnic minority policy. That our fate, our future is seal deal back then. So international community is actually not looking whole things a more constructive way. And I would like to give some credit to some think tanks, some research organizations actually taking even further a step, looking into things in more detail. But what happens in one regime is already figured out how to control global economy, how to be part of the global trade. So, which means whenever you're buying things from they come out of those regime, you're actually really contributing into how they keep continuing their atrocity, what they do to their own people inside. So, for me, if we really consciously take the next step, look into this, is China should not be given that opportunity in international platform by any means. Wherever they go, they figured out how to do it. They know all the those loopholes. They figured out how to go through this loophole. They could drag as long as they can. And so my question and my urge to all the international, the global policy makers and the countries who's actually like a business as usual, and carry on with their business practice, they have to really think harder. Are we doing the right thing? Is it okay to we keep going the way we are going right now? That's probably my message, my reverse question I'll be asking from them. And I'm saddened in a way, like recently EU, commissioner said, oh, there's a possibility of genocide in East Turkestan against Uyghur people. I was like, really? After all this, what we went through, you classifying as a possibility? So for me, that's a really saddest news, I must say. Saddest news in 2022, I heard. So that's not okay. And you have every power, every resource. You can do far more better research than that one. And to come up with a better, the policy, better diagnosis. So I will end here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So if I say what you have said in just one sentence, the international community and the policymakers, they should not allow China to use international forums and institutions to perpetuate their misdeeds. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Namdullah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. I want to say that I agree with both of them. I agree with the points that they've raised. With everything that I've just mentioned, the teachings of His Holiness, I'm not sure if we are talking about punishing the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership would be very appropriate. But I would certainly say that it's important that the leadership and the international community sit back and assess the current Chinese Communist regime and to learn how it has become and understand how it's become the power that it has today, how this dictatorial aggressionist regime has become the power that it has today, and we must accept the truth that the international community, the Western nations, every countries around the world, including India, has hand in this. We have made People's Republic of China powerful that it is today. And we are facing the consequences together. And we now know through China COVID and through many experiences and aggressions that India is facing in so many nations in Indo-Pacific facing, and not just Indo-Pacific, but basically, its relation with Russia, its relation with America, everywhere. We know that the power that it has gained over the years, we must hold ourselves responsible for that. So how do we learn from our mistakes? How can we resolve this? We've seen that when it came to Ukraine, economic sanction was applied. Economic sanction was something that might not have worked perfectly, but we've seen the influence that it has made on Russia. We've seen through the Ukraine occupation, we've seen the true face of China as well. Even though it's not coming out openly, we've seen what they're capable of. So, all I'm trying to say is the international community must bring about economic sanction with China. The governments, including India, America, European countries, we have to learn how to economically impose upon China to make sure that they don't become much more powerful than they are today. Because with each power that they've regained over the years, they've used every resources to further torture the occupied nations. The we're looking at all the transaction or all the you know the murders, the genocide, the torture that we've seen over the years. The international community must take responsibility for it. And how can we deal with China right now is something that we must look into. So I wouldn't give a tactique of how we deal with it. All I want to say is if international community works together, stands together, I'm sure there can be a solution out of this, of ensuring that China doesn't become even more evil than they are today.
Right. Thank you. So we are reaching concluding time, but there is just one more question, which if I can get very quick response on, uh, it's about China being a rogue state. So all the actions which China has done in recent years, does it mean, because it is extreme of what they are doing, uh, is the extreme of bad now going to prove something good for the world? Who would like to answer? One. I request one speaker to answer because we are reaching the concluding time. Kai?
That's a tough question. I think it's certainly the not the right causality, actually, but I think I can just hope that the world or that democratic societies or people who cherish democratic values understand the impact of those autocratic countries on all of our lives, on their very own lives. We're talking about Tibetans, but Uyghurs, Mongolians, Hong Kongers. But me as a European, from my perspective speaking, it needs to be understood that these countries have an impact on our very lives. And if not, we are ready to be in solidarity, which we should, with Tibetans and Uyghurs, then we should understand that our silence also has an impact on ourselves if we remain silent on Tibetans and on Uyghurs.
Right, thank you. There are a few more questions, but I think that shows if we are still have hunger for questions, that proves that we have provoked our audience to understand and then react and ask questions. So let us leave those questions for the next meeting, next webinar. And now we have Mr. Sonam Tsering, who is the General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress, our co-host, whom I will request for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Vijiji. With this, we came to the end of this webinar. So first of all, I wish His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama a very happy 87th birthday. May he live long and continue to inspire the millions around the world with his message of love and compassion, which will ultimately overcome the obstacles and challenges ahead all of us. And recently, during a virtual celebration of His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama's birthday in heaven, His Holiness once said that he will reincarnate in a place where there is a greater need for his service, and assured that he will live for another 20 to 30 years at minimum and continue to guide us. So this is a we should be happy about it. So I thank the participants for the successful webinar today. First, I thank Kai Muller, Mr. Kai Muller, the International Campaign for Tibet Director in Germany, Executive Director in Germany, for taking part in today's webinar. And Kai is one of the many friends of Tibet who put more effort than many Tibetans in terms of promoting Tibetan issue at global level. So thank you, Kai, for participating in our webinar once again. Next, I thank Ms. Mukul Savut, Uyghur leader, for taking part in our webinar today and sharing your perspective on His Holiness leadership, and also for sharing for comparing between Tibet and East Turkestan, how the Chinese is systematically using the same pattern of hardline policies, how they are ruling both the countries one after another. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to have more virtual meetings in the future and joint action as well. So thank you. And next, I want to thank Lajarit Namjit Rokala, Member of Parliament, for accepting our invitation once again and sharing your insightful perspective on today's topic. Lajarit Namjit Rokala is an inspiration to many younger Tibetans, and many of them aspire to follow her footsteps. So thank you for being a piece of idol to many younger Tibetans. Next, I want to thank Vijayji, the chairman of the Chase and co-host of this webinar. And thank you for moderating not only this webinar, but all the webinars Vijayji is moderating. And Vijayji is so active in picking out timely topics. And so thank you for your constant and continuous support on Tibet and working for the cause of Tibet, Vijayji. Next, and also Vijayji has handled the question and answer today, which is usually done by Professor Ayushi Ketka. So thank you, Vijayji. And next, I want to thank Lobsang Stella from Tibet Action Institute for
Yes.
handling the technical part of this webinar, all the webinars. So thank you, Lobsang Stella. And so with this, we are concluding, and we come to the end of today's webinar. It has become a success with so many live viewers. So I also thank the live viewers, live audiences who has joined us virtually. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is time to conclude our today's evening, and my very special thanks to Urgul because to Nurgul because right now it's late night in your part of the world in Canberra, and you have been waking up for this. Thank you very much, and Kai,
My pleasure.
we have yeah, and Kai, we it is always enlightening listening to you and La Guerrilla. Thank you, and we meet once again very soon with a new subject on Tibet, and we'll be sharing our views and uh, opinions from opinion leaders from across the world. So thank you very much, and let us conclude with the long life prayers for His Holiness. We wish him happy birthday once again, and we wish that the whole world should benefit from his philosophy of universal responsibility, which is very much the need of the day today. So thank you very much, everybody. Namaskar, Tashidele, and
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Thank you.